Greetings, my fellow Dragon Age fans out there, wherever you may be on the internet. Now, as indicated by the title of this video, the focus here is going to be an in-depth, detailed analysis and breakdown of a particular build that I put together, that being of a two-handed warrior Reaver specialization. And after about 112 hours of this recent playthrough I've done, I'm going to go through each active skill and passive one by one, breaking down their functionality and why you should be using the skill and how to use the skill, as well as a observation of the attributes you should be pursuing, as well as offensive stats, defensive stats, which will include gear as well and what to focus on when crafting gear. And then, last but not least, actually give you some gameplay demonstrations of how to use the skills and ideally what kind of rotation you should have when it comes to utilizing the available skills you have within the build. Now, to give you a little background on why I decided to make a video so late in the life cycle of this game, back in 2014 of November, I had picked up Dragon Age Inquisition on launch, and my first playthrough I decided to do a two-handed warrior. And of course, when I got to Skyhold, I chose the Reaver specialization. And long story short, after I completed that first playthrough, to say the least, I was highly disappointed with how it turned out. The functionality, particularly of the Reaver tree, skill tree, I was not impressed at all. It was really disappointed. And, you know, fast forward here to 2017, late August, early September, I decided to give this game another playthrough, particularly that of the warrior class, and try the Reaver out once again. Now, I went through the internet, I went on the subreddit, I went on GameFAQs, and the BioWare forums, as well as YouTube, and unfortunately most of the information that I found was kind of outdated. Very little information that I discovered was really around the Trespasser DLC update or afterwards. So while some of the information I did discover was helpful, I felt like that which was available did not give me enough information or breakdown on how to really take advantage of the Reaver specialization and bring it to its full potential. Now, with that being said, I'm sure that other people have done videos before me and have used similar skill or maybe a similar rotation in this Reaver build, but I myself was not able to find all this gathered information that I'm about to present to you in a single video. So essentially, the intent of this video is me being the Dragon Age nerd slash fanboy that I am. Really, this is just something I'm doing as a labor of love, and hopefully those who watch this, you find it helpful in some way, one or another. And so kind of as a sales pitch, if you're out there and you're thinking of doing another playthrough and you want to play Warrior, or maybe you're trying to figure out, you know, what class should I choose next, what specialization I should try, I'm here to tell you that you should give the Reaver a try. Well, why is that? Well, the Reaver class is fairly intense in the specialization. It is a dance of death. You're constantly on the knife's edge, or a razor's edge, in terms of life and death. And not only are you doing a lot of damage, and you're essentially using your health bar as your mana or stamina bar, but it is a build that will require your attention. So as you're exploring areas throughout Ferelden and Orlais, instead of kind of getting bored or kind of going through a snooze fest of spamming the same skills over and over, hopefully you will find this build engaging and entertaining. And so as you're exploring the world of Thedas, you'll be kicking ass, taking names, and feeling like the uttermost badass that has walked the plains of this realm. So, without further ado, let's get started on this thing. So real quickly here, before I start breaking down every active skill and passive of their functions, what you need to get this build to function as soon as possible is you're going to need at least a minimum of about 15 ability points. And that's for damage, stamina, and survivability. So in the Reaver tree, what you're going to need minimum is Ring of Pain with Torrent of Pain, Blood Frenzy, Fervor, Scenting Blood, Devour with Lifeblood, Dragon Rage with Ravage. Then you're going to need to acquire this passive called Warrior's Resolve. Doesn't matter if you get Shield Wall or Payback Strike. They're both irrelevant. You're just trying to get this passive. Then from there, you're going to need Warcry, and then go to Charging Bull. Now, you could technically get away with just spending 1 point here and then putting 2 into Charging Bull. I would highly suggest to get 2 in both for survivability. And then, of course, you absolutely need to have Gore and Trample with Charging Bull. So skills like Devour you can use without the cost of stamina. Now, the build will really start to pick up once you get 17 ability points available. And that's when you can acquire Flow of Battle. So, like I said, you need about 15 to go through the Reaver tree, to get Warrior's Resolve, to get Warcry with Charging Bull, and then from there, come to this tree and get Flow of Battle, and you'll need a minimum of about 17 ability points for this build to really start functioning really well. So 15 to 17 ability points is kind of the bare minimum for this build to kind of function. And depending on if you're playing with even ground and the experience you're gaining, this may come sooner or later. So, but once again, this is kind of the bare minimum you need to get started. Okay, now I'm going to kind of go through each skill one by one, give you a detailed analysis of its functionality and its purpose within the build. Starting with the Reaver tree, Ring of Pain. You mark part of the battlefield as yours. Enemies inside the ring take spirit damage while your own attacks inside the ring hit harder. The more you are hurt, the stronger both effects are. It can be toggled on or off. Has an area effect of 15 meters damage, 15% weapon damage per second. Of course, that is spirit damage that's being applied. Damage bonus 1% extra for each 1% health missing, and then you have the stamina cost. Now, for the upgrade, if you're not familiar with this build, you may look at Painbringer and say, hey, this is kind of convenient. You know, when I cast Ring of Pain, it'll follow me. I don't have to keep recasting the thing. But when you look at the alternative, it's kind of non-negotiable. Turret of Pain, well, Ring of Pain is active. Devour costs less stamina, has a shorter cooldown time, and Dragon Rage costs less of your own health. Now, if you carefully observe the description here, this bonus is really multiplicative. Your Devour is going to cost less stamina. It's going to have a shorter cooldown time. And your Dragon Rage is going to cost less of your own health when you use it. Now, if you combine those three factors, Devour is going to become more readily available because the cooldown is shorter and it costs less stamina. And then because Dragon Rage is consuming less of your own health, the dependency that you're going to have on Devour is not going to be as frequent. So really this bonus here is really multiplicative, and it's kind of non-negotiable. Painbringer looks like it's a convenient thing, but really when you understand the effectiveness of Torrent of Pain, there's really no other option. Looking at Blood Frenzy, kind of self-explanatory. As you lose more health, you're going to deal more damage. You get the strength, +3 strength on the unlock. Of course, and since you're only using Dragon Rage, you're constantly losing health. So the lower your health is, the more damage you're going to be dealing. Now, if you notice, I do not have Terrifying Fury and Rampage. Now, to kind of give a brief description why, Rampage, while the buff is very nice, the problem is the duration. The duration is way too short when you consider how long it takes to build up focus in certain circumstances. And besides, depending on the enemy you're fighting, right, you only really want to use this on like a tough enemy. You're not going to use it on like a little, pleb, right? So if you like, oh, I'm fighting a dragon or I'm fighting a giant or something, and you use it, and then you get bitch slapped and they knock you down, and your ability is being wasted because you can't use it because you're under some kind of status effect. It's really obnoxious. So there's really no logical reason I can see to justify wasting a skill point on this focus ability. Terrifying Fury. The problem with this skill is that when an enemy is like under panic or fear, I think they may be the same status debuff. I could be wrong, but it says what your critical strikes have a chance to cause gory mess and send nearby enemies fleeing in panic. Well, if they're fleeing in panic, that means you have to chase them down. And if you're playing a Reaver build, like is this one, you'd have to run up to them, you'd have to recast Ring of Pain, and it would just be really tedious. You'd spend too much time chasing enemies down instead of just killing them. And the thing is that you don't want enemies running away from you. You want enemies to gather around you. You want them to be clustered nearby to really wreak havoc with this build. Now, looking at the next passive, Fervor, when an enemy dies near you, to throw death spurs you to hit that much harder. The duration of 5 seconds, damage bonus 30%, range is 10 meters, cunning unlock +3. Now with the cunning bonus, it's 1.5% crit chance. The range is not really big, but it's big enough. And of course, you get a damage bonus, which you always want more damage, right? Self-explanatory. The thing is that, of course, as you're playing a warrior, and with the other skills in this build, you're going to be taunting enemies. You want them to just get right up on you. And, of course, as you kill one, you're going to have a damage bonus. And since they're all nice and clustered together and they're really close by, you'll always be able to take advantage of this passive. So, kind of no-brainer here with this one. Scenting Blood, being near a badly wounded enemy spurs you into a frenzy, driving you to move faster and giving you a better chance of striking deadly blows. Range of 10 meters, health threshold 35%, 50% speed bonus, critical hit chance 10%, constitution unlock +3. This is a really awesome passive because if you read carefully, because I made the mistake of thinking that, okay, this buff only applies to an enemy that I've wounded. So, like, if I'm fighting a boss-type enemy and they're at that health threshold, I'm going to, have a higher crit chance and speed bonus when focusing on them. But actually, no, it's just enemies within the vicinity. So, of course, once again, you're playing a warrior class, you're in the thick of it. Just having an enemy nearby you that's hurt is going to give you this buff. So you don't even necessarily have to keep attacking that enemy. You can decide, hey, while I have this crit chance bonus, I'm going to try and wear this other guy down to take advantage of the passive while the wounded enemy is still alive. Then, of course, you have the Constitution bonus on unlock. But really nice passive. Devour, Blood is Life. You rip into your enemy, doing damage based on how badly you're wounded and healing yourself. Ring of Pain significantly increases the effect. Does 100% weapon damage, and then the health restored, the bonus damage per the amount of health missing. You have a cooldown time of 12 seconds. Stamina cost is 60 without any reduction, and then you have your Ring of Pain bonus. For the upgrade, once again, Lifeblood, it's kind of non-negotiable. If you look at Consume, and you're not really reading in the details there, you're like, oh man, plus 25% critical hit bonus, And especially it's tempting when you're really low on crit chance. It's not really that high yet. But really it only applies to one Dragon Rage attack. So your next attack is going to have a crit chance bonus, and then after that it's just, if it lasted like 6 seconds or something, then maybe. But honestly, when you look at the alternative Lifeblood, it's kind of non-negotiable. Use of Devour now heals for more damage, and then of course you have the Ring of Pain bonus. Now, of course, since you're always going to be using Ring of Pain, you're always going to be putting that down before you do anything else. This is drastically going to increase your survivability. Because ideally, when you're in the fight, you want to get your health down as low as possible before you cast Devour. And then, of course, the lower your health is, the more you're going to get back. And if you're using Consume instead of Lifeblood, you're not going to be getting that much health back. So you're going to have to be casting Devour more frequently, and so your downtime is going to be greater. So whereas if you're using Lifeblood, you're going to be spending more time just tearing up people with Dragon Rage. And that's really what you want. You want to be using Dragon Rage as much as possible with minimal downtime. kind of self-explanatory. This is what you need to get your health back, and to really make it effective, you really need the lifeblood upgrade. Dragon Rage, of course, this is your bread and butter. This is the only attack you're using all the time. You launch an attack fueled by your fury, ripping into foes for damage that increases as your own wounds deepen. Ring of Pain significantly increases the effect you take damage with each swing. Damage bonus 150%. Then you have 1% bonus damage per 1% of missing health. Costs 2% health. Ring of Pain bonus 50%. And then you have two other options here. Leech Fury and Ravage. Now, once again, non-negotiable. Dragon Rage no longer damages you, although you can no longer use as often. Cooldown of 10 seconds. When you look at how frequently you can use Dragon Rage as an attack, and then you look at Leech Fury, I mean, it's like there's really no point. Like, to be able to only use it once every 10 seconds, that's like an absurd handicap. There's really no reason to use this upgrade at all. Ravage, on the other hand, of course, for some, Dragon Rage is a dangerous ability. For you, it's the only way to fight. You now hit harder and reduce the cooldown time of Devour with every attack. Damage bonus, 50% cooldown reduction, 2 seconds. Now, of course, you do more damage. You always want that, right? And then it's reducing the cooldown on your Devour. So, multiplicative bonus, once again. You're doing more damage. Your Devour is going to be available even more frequently. And so once your health does get low, Devour is going to be available to get about 9 back. So kind of self-explanatory here. There's really no reason not to use Ravage. Like Leech Fury is just you don't want to use that. So that pretty much kind of sums up the Reaver tree. Okay, now moving on to the next skill tree, Weapon and Shield. The main thing you're going for is the passive called Warrior's Resolve. Now, unfortunately, you'll have to waste an ability point on either Payback Strike or Shield Wall. Doesn't really matter which one, you're not going to be using it, but you'll have to go through one of them to acquire this passive. Now, this passive is absolutely critical. It is the backbone, if not the backbone, for any functioning Reaver build out there. Now, you may think, well, why is that? Well, if you're not familiar with how the build works, when you go to Ring of Pain is an active skill that is constantly draining your stamina. Now, for Devour and Dragon Rage to be functional, to be useful at all, you have to have Ring of Pain down. You have to. There's no way around it. Now, since I've explained that part, I'll explain passive and active stamina regen. Now, passive stamina regen is when you're just kind of standing there doing nothing and it comes back on its own. Active stamina regen is when you're using your default kind of melee attack, and every time you land a hit, you'll get some stamina back when you deal damage. Now, for example, if you use Mighty Blow, right? I don't know if it's like a certain time or it's just the duration of the cast or animation or whatever, but when you use something like Mighty Blow, in the instant that you use it, for a brief period of time, your passive stamina regen will be disabled. Okay? Now, with knowing that, when you go back to Ring of Pain, you realize that when Ring of Pain is active, it's constantly draining stamina as an active skill. So your passive stamina regen will never kick in. So your only alternative to get stamina back while Ring of Pain is active is your basic melee attacks, right? Which, if you're doing that, that's kind of pointless. You might as well just disable Ring of Pain and then use basic attacks to get your stamina back and then recast it. That's why, to kind of go into more detail here, a passive like Deep Reserves is actually not as useful as you would think with this build, because the threshold is at 50%. So unless it's halfway below, this passive never kicks in. And of course, it's going to affect passive and active stamina regen. So since your passive stamina regen is always disabled when Ring of Pain is active, the only way you can take advantage of this is with basic melee attacks, which is, once again, you might as well just disable Ring of Pain and use basic melee attacks. And of course, that kind of sucks because, well, you're going to have a lot of downtime. You know, you got to decast Ring of Pain, you got to start doing basic melee attacks until your stamina gets all the way back up to recast it, and blah, 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 so on and so forth. And you don't want downtime. You want maximum uptime, right? So Warrior's Resolve is the workaround to this issue. It says you fight all the harder when you're hurting, gain stamina when you lose health, 10% stamina for every 10% of your health that is lost, Constitution unlock +3. Now, since you're always using Dragon Rage, right, that's your bread and butter. You're always using Dragon Rage to deal damage. You're always losing health. And so in turn, you're always getting a portion of your stamina back. So your sustainability with Ring of Pain and your Dragon Rage and Devour is enormous. You can go a hell of a lot longer without any downtime, and that's what you want, right? You want to be sustaining Ring of Pain and ripping people in half with Dragon Rage as long as possible with minimal downtime. Now, the one thing I'll say that I've noticed, and it's kind of a bug, I have some theories on why it occurs, but when you cast, like let's say you own a fight, you cast Ring of Pain, use Dragon Rage, you wait until your health gets really, really low, you cast Devour, get a lot of your health back, almost all of it, and then Ring of Pain is still active and you're casting Dragon Rage, right? And you notice that as your health is depleting, your stamina is not coming back up with the Warrior's Resolve. And I think what happens is that when Ring of Pain is active, when you technically lose like the equivalent of like 100% of your health, I think Warrior Resolve kind of bugs out. So occasionally what you may have to do is after you cast Devour, you may want to recast Ring of Pain just to kind of start that cycle over again, so you're going to get stamina back as you're using Dragon Rage. That's just a theory, but it doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But if you notice that, just be mindful to try and recast Ring of Pain when you have the opportunity. Okay, now moving on to the next skill tree, Vanguard. As you can tell, I pretty much have everything purchased in this tree with the exception of Bodyguard. Now, there's a lot of utility you get out of the Vanguard tree. Some things are obvious, some not so much. And I'll kind of go in order in terms of which skills I feel like you should purchase as you're leveling up. But starting with Warcry, you taunt all nearby enemies with a Shadow Challenge, gaining extra guard for each enemy affected. Duration of 8 seconds. You get 20% guard bonus per enemy, and then a 24-second cooldown time. Now, each upgrade here is very strong. In the right circumstance, they're equally good. Now, Call to Arms is great if you're in a boss fight. So, like if you're just fighting a giant, or if you're fighting a dragon, you're not really having to worry about anything else. Call to Arms is the way to go, especially like with a giant, you know, when they grab those boulders and they throw them on top of you, it's a huge amount of burst damage. So with a skill like this, you can kind of time it to where you can beef up your toughness at the right moment and drastically increase your survivability. And a 200% armor bonus is a lot. You'll be extremely hard to kill while this buff is active. Now the other one, Battle Roar, this is what you're going to be using most of the time when you're like exploring regions, so on and so forth. Because in most fights, you know, you're fighting more than one enemy. You're fighting 3, 4, 5, or whatever. And the bonuses here are multiplicative. So the duration of the taunt is increased by 4 seconds. So you're able to keep enemies off your squishy mages and rogues for a longer period of time while keeping them inside the Ring of Pain. And then on top of that, the area of effect is increased. So you're able to grab more enemies as well as potentially gain a lot more guard with a single cast because it's covering a bigger area. So yeah, Warcry, no brainer, great ability, serves a lot of purposes in one. No reason to pass this up. Next one's going to be Charging Bull. You slam into your enemies, increasing your guard and knocking them down as you break their lines. You do 150% damage per enemy hit. You get a 10% bonus to your guard per enemy hit. The cooldown is 8 seconds, and the cost is I think it's about 6 stamina or whatever without any stamina reduction. But anyways, when it comes to the upgrade, you really want to go with Gore and Trample. Now, when you're experimenting with this build, you might look at Light on your Feet and say, hey, this is kind of nice. I I move faster and I can control the direction I'm going. But really, with Gore and Trample, when you're playing a Reaver, this is non-negotiable. You really need to go with Gore and Trample. It says, after you finish your charge, your next ability costs no stamina. Duration is 6 seconds. Now, this means this is great for any circumstance, right? So it's good in the middle of a fight. It's good at the end of a fight. It's good for the beginning of a fight, right? So you see a bunch of enemies. You charge in there. You can cast War Cry immediately afterwards. It'll cost you no stamina. Then you throw down a Ring of Pain. Everyone comes to attack you, and then you just rip them up with Dragon Rage. Or if you're in the middle of a fight and you got Ring of Pain down and you're tearing away your enemy with Dragon Rage and your health is starting to get really low, what you can do is you can just use Charging Bull and then immediately follow up with Devour, and it'll cost you no stamina. So bam, you just healed yourself with, using any stamina, and you can just keep tearing into them with Dragon Rage as your Ring of Pain is kind of going along. And besides that, there's just a lot of great things about this skill. The stamina cost is very, very minimal, and it's a maintain thing. So technically, you could, like with using Devour, if you have an enemy inside your Ring of Pain, you don't even have to hit them for the Gore and Trample to activate. You just have to cast a skill. So wherever you have it configured, you can just tap your Charging Bull button, Gore and Trample would kick in, and then follow it up with a Devour. So you don't have to worry about Charging Bull like maybe misplacing you on the battlefield. It's very precise in its use. And the stamina cost is very, very minimal. So that synergizes well with Ring of Pain because you need all your stamina to maintain that. The cooldown time is also very, very short as well, so you can use it very frequently. You're going to get a guard for every time you hit an enemy, and then you deal some damage, weapon damage on top of that. But like in the circumstance where, like, if your mage buddy is getting tore up, you can turn around, use charge to reach him quickly, and then with most enemies, depending on what kind they are, you can knock them down, and that gives your mage plenty of time to relocate, as well as, of course, doing damage and getting guard off of it. And then you can follow that up with whatever, because your next skill is going to cost no stamina. So yeah, Charging Bull, incredible skills, has a lot of functions, no reason to pass this up. Now, this passive, it'll cost you, I'm not very fond of, but you kind of have to purchase it to get to Livid. Now, if the damage returned was making a difference, I didn't really notice it. Because if you think about it, like, not to get too technical, but I feel like if an enemy deals damage, there's a whole bunch of questions. Is it calculated on your damage mitigation? Like, obviously stuff like critical hit chance and critical hit damage doesn't affect damage return. There's a lot of reasons why damage return is just, that at least from what I've observed, is just not good. But without getting really technical, the only thing you really get out of this is the strength bonus, +3 on luck. Now, Livid, the skill that you want to go for next is amazing. Livid synergizes incredibly well with the Reaver build. It says the more foes nearby, the harder you fight, the tougher you get. Lasts 15 seconds, has an area effect of 5 meters, stacks up to 5 times, reduces your damage you take by 10% per enemy, damage bonus increased 10% per enemy hit. And so what that means is that, which it'll kind of come naturally, but as you're fighting a big group of enemies, for every enemy you hit, you'll get the damage bonus. Now, the passive here, or excuse me, the upgrade, standing still is good if you're having a real toughness issue, but honestly, because of the long cooldown that this ability has, you really want to go with Endless Strength. Endless Strength is incredible. It says strike a killing blow while with Livid active resets its duration. So you could technically keep this buff up indefinitely if you're landing a killing blow every 14 seconds, which is very likely with the Reaver build. Also, it costs no stamina, and the casting animation for this is very, very short. So, like, you're not just standing there like a retard, casting a spell. It's just you hit the button, it activates, boom, you go back to ripping people up with Dragon Rage. But like I said, it doesn't cost any stamina, which is amazing. So you can throw this down at any time in the fight, and it's not going to affect your stamina whatsoever. So it synergizes extremely well with the Reaver build. Like it's an incredible skill. I can't compliment it enough. Now, after you get Livid, I would say the next logical step is to go for Untouchable Defense. It says they can't hit what they can't, or excuse me, they can't kill what they can't hit. You get a bonus to your maximum guard, bonus to guard 25%, constitutional unlock +3. Now, depending if you know how guard works or not, the way that guard works is that your default guard is 25% of your maximum health. So with a guard bonus like this, or what you can get from the champion skill tree, it is additive. It is not multiplicative. So that means if you have 100 hit points, your maximum guard by default is 25. If you add Untouchable Defense, your maximum guard will be 50 hit points. Sorry, I had a brain fart there. So effectively, whatever your maximum hit point pool is, with this passive, your guard will be half of whatever that is. So, which I'll get into it in a different point in the video, but that's why you don't want to just go all strength. You want to have some constitution bonuses in your gear because it's going to increase your guard, which you want to have a guard meter that's meaty enough that you can depend on, so you can just kind of flail around with Dragon Rage with Reckless Abandon, not having to worry about enemies breaking through it too easily. But yeah, really great passive. No reason to ignore that. Okay, now next in line, you would probably want to go with Trust the Steel. Now, you of course have to kind of go through Challenge to get Trust the Steel. Now, Challenge, it is on my skill bar, and I don't use it too frequently, but it still can serve some purpose. Now, it's a powerful shout carries across the battlefield, taunting a targeted enemy and improving your guard. Duration of 8 seconds. You get 10% guard during the cast. Cooldown time 16 seconds, and the stamina I think is like 20 or whatever. Now, when it comes to the passive here, you have Call Them Out and then Throw the Gauntlet. Now, Call Them Out says you can challenge as many enemies as you want with no cooldown. This doesn't really do anything because you're going to have the Flow of Battle passive in this build. So cooldown won't be an option, or excuse me, will not be an issue with this build. That's why you want to go with Throw the Gauntlet. Throw the Gauntlet, successfully hitting a target with challenge, get your blood pumping, temporarily increasing your stamina regeneration. Now, typically what I'll do is when I use challenge, I don't use it often, but when I do use it, I either use it if there's just like a single target I'm trying to pull inside of my ring of pain that's just kind of wandering off somewhere, or I can use it at the start of the fight, because as soon as you cast this, you immediately get your stamina back. So if you're starting a fight and you don't have any guard, you can cast challenge to get that 10% bonus and then immediately follow it up with Charging Bull and then Warcry right after that. Also, which occasionally it will happen, but the skill helps with your downtime. So if you're in a situation where you've lost your stamina and you're trying to get it back up again before you recast Ring of Pain, well, as you're using your default melee attack to get some stamina back, you can cast this immediately as it's available, and it'll give you a stamina boost for about 8 seconds, right? So you get 8 seconds of 15 stamina per second. So it's going to help decrease your downtime to some degree. So while you're not going to be using it that much, it does serve a purpose, because honestly, there's really not too many other options you're going to have in this build when it comes to active skills. You know, a lot of it's going to be passives. Now, after that, depending on what your preference is, you can either do Trust the Steel or Cutting Words in whichever order you want. Of course, with this, it depends. If you're just running just with one warrior and everyone else is either a rogue or a mage, then you'll want to go with Cutting Words because it's going to give a damage bonus to your allies when you taunt enemies. Now, Trust the Steel, kind of self-explanatory. Gives you a 20% armor bonus and Constitution on unlock. So this is just going to increase your toughness. So with these two passives, it's kind of self-explanatory. Don't have to go into too much detail. But with here, you can kind of purchase these in any order you want. But I would highly suggest to get both of them at some point when you're leveling. Okay, now moving on to the next skill tree of two-handed weapon. The main thing you're going for in this skill tree are passives. You have three in particular. You have Flow of Battle, Shield Breaker, and Clear Path. Now, the stuff on the right side you're not going to worry about until later on in your leveling. Really, it's Flow of Battle that you want to acquire early on. Now, with these three passive skills you have to go through, you're not going to be using them. Primarily, you're not going to be using them because you only have 8 slots to map skills to, especially for console gamers. And because you're so limited to 8, it's like you don't really want to waste it on an ability you're not going to use to its utmost effectiveness. Also, when it comes to damage output, since you're always using Dragon Rage, nothing really can compete with Dragon Rage in the two-handed weapon tree. It's just Dragon Rage just casts such a huge shadow. There's nothing that you can do with these skills to really compete. Unless you're going for like utility and cross class combos and stuff, but that would be a totally different build. Anyways, besides the point, the first thing you want to go for is Flow of Battle. Now, ideally, once you get the essential stuff in the Reaver tree, then you want to get Warrior's Resolve and Sword and Shield, and then from there, at least get Charging Bull and Warcry from Vanguard, and then from there, get Flow of Battle. Now, with Flow of Battle, it says every critical hit reduces the cooldown times on your abilities, giving you the edge to finish off your enemies. Cooldown reduction 1 second, strength on unlock +3. Now, the main reason why you're getting Flow of Battle is for Devour. Devour it's not just for survivability, but you have to realize that if you're not familiar with this build, your health bar is like your mana bar or your stamina bar. You have to use that to keep using Dragon Rage. So even if you had your guard all the way up and enemies were doing like no damage, they can never get past your guard, you would still need Devour to refill your health to keep using Dragon Rage. And that's where Flow of Battle comes into play as being a critical piece of the puzzle. With Flow of Battle, every time you crit, you're reducing the cooldown on your skills, and that is allowing you to use Devour whenever necessary. And especially if you're fighting a spellcaster or something and you take a huge amount of spike damage and you're trying to get your life back before you get killed, Devour will be ready 99% of the time with Flow of Battle, especially if you have sufficient crit chance, which you really want about 20, honestly about 25%. You want at least 25% crit chance, so 1 out of 4 to make Flow of Battle effective. And then, of course, it's not just going to affect Devour, right? So with Charging Bull having an 8-second cooldown, which is pretty short, with Flow of Battle, you're going to be able to use that even more frequently to either cast Warcry or Devour at the cost of no stamina. So Flow of Battle is another critical piece of the puzzle, really essential. Now, the other two here, like I said, you're not going to acquire until later on, after you get all your essential stuff out of the way. But Shield Breaker says your critical hits, crack armor, and rend shield, sundering your enemy's armor for a short time. Reduces damage reduction by 20%, lasts 6 seconds, strength on unlock +6. Now, this synergizes really well because naturally you're stacking critical hit chance, right? So you're going to make a lot of use out of this passive. Now, it's reducing the armor, so not only is your damage output going to be increased, but rogues or other warriors in your party are going to deal more damage with their physical abilities because of the reduction to their armor. And then, of course, you get the bonus of strength. Now, Clear Path is kind of... It's kind of in that area where it's good, but it's not necessary. I don't think. It's not necessary. You could do without. The reason why I say that is because Dragon Rage, it can hit multiple enemies, but they do have to be pretty close to each other. But it says, you know, hitting multiple targets with a single swing of your weapon restores your stamina for each extra target. Excuse me. And most of the time, you're only going to hit, you know, like one extra target when that goes off. But it's something that if you really want to make sure that you can maintain your stamina better, clear path is the way to go. But if you don't want to use it, you can put that ability point somewhere else. So it is useful, but it is not necessary, because Warrior's Resolve simply is just strong enough to maintain your stamina. Okay, quickly here I'm going to touch on the Inquisitor skill tree. Now if you look at the bottom right hand side, the skills I have equipped are Dragon Rage, Devour, Charging Bull, Warcry, Ring of Pain, Livid, Challenge, and then Mark of the Rift. Now, really, on my toolbar, only 6 of these abilities I was using frequently. Challenge I would use occasionally. It just depends on the circumstance, and when I was low on stamina, basically I would use it to help on my downtime so I could get Ring of Pain back up and continue my rotation. And then, of course, I had Mark of the Rift on my toolbar as well. Now, through this playthrough, I did some experimentation, and with a Reaver build, since you want to dedicate most of your stamina to Ring of Pain, you're not really going to be using too many other active skills, right? Charging Bull is the one exception, because since it's so cheap on stamina, and since you use it to allow stuff like Devour or Warcry to be free of charge with Gore and Trample, really most of your stamina is going to Ring of Pain. So instead of adding another active ability, I decided to go ahead and equip Mark of the Rift, because I ended up kind of upgrading my Inquisition perks to allow me to have focus up to the 3rd tier. And so basically it's just there because I don't use it often, but occasionally when I'm in a bad spot, I'll have the ability available, and typically I'll have all 3 bars of my focus filled up. And it will kill certain enemies outright, depending on their rank. It can do potentially a lot of damage, depending on the type of the enemy. And then, of course, if it's a large enemy, you can basically use it to kind of put them in a time bubble to slow them down, just to allow your party to heal or put their barrier back up or guard or whatever. So it's a really nice tool just to have on your toolbar just in case you get in a bad spot. But I didn't really see any active skill I really wanted to put on there and waste stamina on. So inevitably, I just went ahead and used Mark of the Rift for the oh shit, you know, extreme circumstance. All right, now for the final skill tree in this build, Battlemaster. This stuff is going to come late in your leveling experience, like 20 or above, level 20 or above, like with Shield Breaker, Clear Path. Excuse me. Now, as I was getting close to level cap, I was trying to, you know, experiment with like what would be a good passive or skill to have. And at first I tried Deep Reserves, and at first glance it looks really nice, but in practice it's actually not that effective. Now I don't want to like totally rehash what I said earlier, but essentially with Deep Reserves, since Ring of Pain is an active skill that drains stamina, your passive stamina regen will never kick in. It never takes into effect. However, this does also affect your active stamina regen, which is your default weapon swing. Well, if you're going to do that, there's no point in trying to sustain Ring of Pain while you're trying to slowly get your stamina back with your standard attacks. Like it's just kind of dumb. It's counterproductive. You're better off just disabling Ring of Pain and then, you know, getting your stamina all the way back to 100 and then starting your rotation over again. Now, since I had to go through challenge to get Trust the Steel, which is a nice bonus to your toughness, I figured why not just use my ability point and go with Throw the Gauntlet to actually make use of it instead of using Deep Reserves. Because with Throw the Gauntlet, if you're in a situation where you've run out of stamina, you know, just do your default attacks, and then as soon as you get the stamina to cast it, which is very cheap, cast challenge with Throw the Gauntlet, and you'll get a nice stamina boost for that 8 seconds, and you'll be back up to 100 stamina fairly quickly. So to me, that seemed to synergize better than trying to make deep reserves work. Because in practice, once you actually play with it, it's really not that effective, honestly. And then, of course, having to go through hamstring, that's how I feel about that skill. Grappling chain, I messed around with grappling chain so much, and it's kind of inconsistent. Early on in the game, it's really nice, but I feel like the later on you get in the game, when you're starting to fight more unique and tougher enemies, like sometimes it just doesn't work or it's inconsistent. Like, for example, some of the weakest enemies you encounter are the green, like phantoms or ghosts from the Fade Rifts, right, throughout all of Ferelden and Orlais. And even though while they're very frail, if you try to use grappling chain, it simply doesn't work on them. You can't pull them to you, so you have to run up to them and attack them anyways. Also, certain enemies, like for example a mage or like some kind of enemy spellcaster, a lot of times you'll pull them to you, and then once they get up, they'll immediately re-teleport. And it's just like it was nice at the beginning, but honestly, its effectiveness is too inconsistent to me to really keep it on the skill list. So what I ended up doing is I went to the left side here, and I went with Crippling Blows and Coup de Grace. Now, Coup de Grace is pretty simple, right? Do 30% extra damage to enemies that are knocked down, and you get a +3 strength and unlock, which makes sense, like using Charging Bull, that knocks people down, or other abilities that people have in your party. So occasionally you can make good use of this passive. Not all the time, but some of the time. So it's worth to have. But really what I liked was Crippling Blows. Now, at first I kind of glossed over this passive. But it says, you know how to take the fight out of your foes. Your critical hits leave enemies weakened. Damage reduction 15%. Duration 10 seconds. This effect stacks. Strength on unlock +3. Now, if you notice carefully where it says this effect stacks, now I don't know what the maximum stack is, but it took me a while to realize actually how incredible this passive is. Since you're naturally going to be stacking critical hit chance, you're really going to take advantage of this passive. And especially there are certain enemies, like for example, like brutes, right? Those big guys that got the 200 weapons, and they just do this whirlwind nonstop, and they're just slinging you all over the place. Those guys can be a real pain in the ass if you're in a bad position. But with Crippling Blows, you can essentially focus fire enemies that do a lot of damage. And essentially you can kind of neuter them, for lack of a better term. And while they may still slap some of your allies around, the damage they're going to do is going to be severely reduced. So not only is it increasing the survivability of your own character, but also that of your friendlies. So yeah, overall, I'd say late in the leveling experience, just go for Coup de Grace and Crippling Blows. And this skill I feel like is kind of underrated. I don't see too many people talking about it, but I would say it's most definitely worth the ability point. Okay, so in this section, I'm going to do an overview of your attributes, your offensive, defensive stats, as well as your gear. Now, one thing that I noticed when I was browsing for information on how to do this build really well, I noticed that some people were talking about how they would craft rogue gear and put it on their warrior to get the dexterity and cunning. Now, at first you think that makes sense, but you have to understand a warrior's base damage is only affected by the strength stat. So if you take dexterity and cunning, while your crit chance and your crit damage will increase, your base damage is going to suffer. So if your base damage sucks, it doesn't matter how high dexterity or cunning you get. Now, also, your constitution will be lacking. Now, you don't want to also make the other mistake of just stacking strength and not having any constitution. Because, once again, your health bar is essentially your mana or stamina bar, and your guard meter is your life bar. That is your life bar. Now, with strength, of course, for every point of strength, your attack increases, your base damage, and as well as guard damage bonus. Now, with constitution, you're getting health per every point, as well as melee defense. So your overall survivability will increase with this stat. Now, to kind of go back into something I mentioned when I talked about the Vanguard tree, when you're using guard, your default guard pool of hit points is 25% based off of your maximum health. So let's scroll down here. So my maximum health is almost 1500, right? So in the Vanguard tree, since I have the passive Untouchable Defense purchased, instead of just being 25%, the bonus is actually additive, so it goes up to 50. And I think there's another passive in the Champion tree which will add another 20 or 25% bonus to your guard meter. But yeah, once again, it's not multiplicative, it is additive. So since I almost have 1500 health, if I get my guard up to 100%, my guard meter will be about 750 points. And of course, armor and resistances will be calculated into the effectiveness of that meter. So it's really critical, especially since you're playing a Reaver, to have a nice meaty guard hit points or pool of hit points to keep you alive, and so you don't accidentally have an enemy just kind of chewing through it and then getting your health and then killing you when you're really low and you haven't used the Devour yet. Now, when it comes to defensive stuff, if you read the descriptions carefully, because I made this mistake at first, melee defense, the percentage of damage resistance to all melee physical attacks. Range defense, the percentage of damage resistance to all ranged physical attacks. So melee and range defense only applies to physical damage. It does not apply to magical damage. And that's going to be kind of your weakness as a warrior. Is the only real defense you're going to have is your guard and the increase in your health pool overall. Your magic defense is never really going to be that high because you're not stacking magic and willpower, right? So the only thing that you can really do is if you're using whatever the best you have, what's available. If you're crafting a piece of gear and you have the option to use like a defensive cloth slot or whatever, try to go for magic defense as you can, because this is going to be the one sore spot of a warrior class, is the lacking of magical defense. And especially depending on what gear you've acquired, what schematics you acquired, you may be limited. So, but the melee and range defense only applies to physical. And of course, it's better to just stack magic defense than to just stack a particular element. So it's much more effective that way. Now, getting to offensive stats. Okay, your guard's damage bonus is going to be high since you're going to stack strength naturally. So like stuff like guard breaker or passives relating to that, that's not really necessary because you're already getting a damage bonus from the strength stat. So you don't have to stack that in particular. Now attack, if that ever comes available, particularly like your two-handed weapon, which is going to be your stat stick for offensive stuff, that's where you're going to be stacking attack and crit chance, so on and so forth. So whenever it's available, when you have that utility slot, just try to go for straight-up attack percentage bonus. And that's going to increase your overall base damage, which is what you want. Armor penetration, I would say you don't really need, because some enemies will have a lot of armor, some enemies won't. Some enemies may just have a lot of hit points and not that much armor. And of course, if you have a rogue in your party, they have some abilities that sunder enemies' armor. And also, when you acquire the Shield Breaker passive, that allows you to sunder enemy armor when you crit them. So armor penetration, not really necessary. Barrier damage bonus, kind of the same thing. Critical damage bonus and critical chance. Now, these two are the important part. Now, I would say as you're leveling up and you're starting to spend ability points in the Reaver tree and trying to get this thing to function, I would say for something like the flow of battle to function effectively, you need at least a 25% critical hit chance. You can do 20, but you really want 25. You want it to be at least 1 out of 4 hits to be a crit, to take advantage of the flow of battle. That way you can always you maintain the uptime on your Devour ability, so you can get health back whenever you need to. And then from 25%, if you can, the next threshold, you want it to be about 33% or 34%, so it's about 1 out of every 3 attacks. And then from there, you can comfortably focus on critical damage bonus when it's available. So when you're applying leather slots to your weapon and you have the option of crit chance or critical bonus, be careful to observe your stats and see which one you need. If you already have enough crit, if you're already like at 34 or higher, then stack critical damage bonus from that point onward. But like I said, you want to obtain the threshold of at least 25% crit chance for a lot of your passives, specifically Flow of Battle, to function frequently enough. That way stuff like Devour and especially Charging Bull will have minimal downtime. Now for gear, what I did that I think worked pretty well, and I would suggest doing on your playthrough, is when it comes to your armor, specifically your helmet and your suit, what you want to focus on is strength and constitution, and then of course the affiliated defensive stats. So like here on my helmet, it's just strength and constitution. My armor suit, it's constitution and strength, and then I have a health as a defensive slot, and then also ranged as well. So with your weapon is going to be your offensive stat stick. So this is where you want to stack specifically attack bonus, crit chance, and crit damage, and then if you can add stats on there as well, just depending on what schematics you have available to you. But particularly crit chance, crit bonus, plus damage attack, that's what you're going to be going for. But if you can, whether it be on your weapon or your gear, ideally, whenever you have a utility slot, I would suggest using materials that offer strength and constitution. So that way, while your damage may not be as high if you're just stacking strength, since you're improving your constitution, your melee defense as well as your health pool will be higher. Thus, your guard health pool will be higher, and your toughness will be higher. Thus, you can really kind of go crazy with Dragon Rage and don't care about losing health because you have a nice meaty bar of guard to go through before an enemy can touch your health pool. So, but that pretty much will sum it up for this section. Okay, so here I'll actually give you a demonstration in terms of skill rotation. Nothing fancy, just a breakdown. If you don't have any guard, what you can do is you can just start the fight off with challenge, and then follow that up with Charging Bull, then immediately cast Warcry, and use Livid, and then follow that up with Ring of Pain, and then just start wailing on him with the Dragon Rage ability. Now, of course, he's kind of slapping me around here with his stun melee attack, but simply when my health gets really low, I'll just use Charging Bull and then immediately follow that up with Devour to get my health back for free without any cost of stamina. Okay, so here I found some red Templars. I'm going to say just in case. So if I embarrass myself, I'll be able to try this over. Now with Charging Bull, since I'm going to get guard per enemy hit, instead of using challenge to kind of aggro them, I want to get them while they're kind of together and I can hit them all at once. So I'll start the fight off with Charging Bull, get 3 hits on them, tear down Warcry, follow that with Livid, and then Ring of Pain, and then I'll just tear into them. And since Livid is active, my damage bonus is increasing per enemy that surrounds me. And then on top of that, my damage output is increasing as well. And I kind of tear through those guys, no problem. And then I got this Bronto here. I'm going to throw up a Warcry and then Livid and Ring of Pain. Kind of refresh that. So my health's getting low, no big deal. Charging Bull, follow that up with Devour. Little downtime. When that happens, throw up Challenge. Just do your standard melee attack. Then your stamina comes back. Bring up Ring of Pain and Livid. And then, there you go. So, I mean, there's multiple factors here that are contributing. Like, Livid is increasing my damage output and my damage mitigation per every enemy that surrounds me up to a maximum of 5. I'm using Charging Bull with the Gore and Trample passive to make my Devour free of charge. And then, of course, with stuff like Crippling Blows, every time I'm landing a crit, I'm reducing the damage output of that enemy by 15%. So, really, the only enemies that really pose a threat in a big fight are the enemies that you're not currently attacking. If they're right up on you and you're landing a crit on all of them, you're actually going to be extremely hard to kill. So the only enemies that are really going to mess you up are spellcasters that are like teleporting all over the place and then bombarding you, and they're doing full damage because you haven't landed a crit on them to have crippling blows take into effect. So those are really the only kind of enemies that are going to cause problems. Like Arcane Horrors. Arcane Horrors are a pain in the ass because they just teleport around and then throw out this spell that hits you like 33 times and it does a bunch of damage per hit. Yeah. So, but this build is pretty solid. Pretty solid. And then I guess while I'm at it, I'll do another demonstration here on this giant. Start off with challenge. Oh, he's throwing a boulder. I'm gonna see if I can get underneath him there with my charging bull. That totally smacked me. So here I'm kind of in trouble. Need to get a Devour off as fast as I can. There we go. See, he's kind of slapping me around before I can get enough critical hits on him to nerf his damage output. Alright, there we go. Now he's doing less damage. Going to disable Ring of... Well, never mind, I did recast. Just continue with Dragon Rage here. Okay, before Ring of Pain goes out, I'm going to throw in a Charging Bull and Devour. Then throw up a Challenge or throw the Gauntlet. Then throw up Livid, Ring of Pain, then I'm back to Dragon Rage. So, even though occasionally you will experience some downtime, it's going to be very minor. It's not going to occur too often. But occasionally when it does, be ready to throw up a Challenge to get that temporary stamina bonus. So, once again, downtime, throw up Challenge. He's almost dead anyways. Livid, Ring of Pain, back to Dragon Rage. So, but that's kind of the build and the rotation in a nutshell. Now, what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to see if I can just get his attention. Use Challenge. See what, now I got the rogue's attention too. Okay, so I'll use Charging Bull. Start off the fight. He blocked that. So I'll still get the Gore and Trample bonus, so I'll throw out War Cry. But I'll attack him, and watch how he blocks my attacks. Now, the one thing you need to watch out for is that he's constantly blocking my attacks, but as I throw out Devour, he blocks it. And even though it's not costing me any stamina, I'm not getting any health back at all, which is a serious issue. Because if you're not able to get any health back, not only is your survivability nerfed, but your ability to use Dragon Rage as well. See, he's just constantly blocking. I finally killed him. Fortunately, he wasn't promoted. If he was promoted, he probably would have killed me. So I'll wait for my Livid to come back up. But just to show you in real time, Livid, Charging Bull, War Cry, Ring of Pain. Alright, I got my health back. Then he's teleported, disappeared, came back. Trying it again, got behind him, disappeared again. Where'd he go? I have no idea where he's at. And I'm now, of course, that ghoul there with the bow kind of did a little damage. But to kind of prove my point, strong spellcasters are going to wreak havoc on your world. Because naturally, since Constitution and Strength are your two main stats, you're not really going to get any magical defense through willpower and magic, because of course those are not your stats you're going to be stacking. So arcane horrors in general are difficult, and once again, this is on nightmare difficulty, but I'm just doing this to kind of show you in real time what are some of the drawbacks of this particular build, and one of those being very powerful spellcasters. Alright, my fellow Dragon Age fans, wherever you may be out there on the internet, those of you who have actually watched the video and gotten up to this point, hopefully it's been helpful or informative in one way or another pertaining to the warrior class. I'd also like to give a round of applause to BioWare, particularly the people of the development team that focused on the combat mechanics and the gameplay thereof. I really felt like Dragon Age Inquisition had a solid start when it launched. There were some issues, but with the content patches and updates, as well as what came with the Trespasser DLC, I really felt like that really polished off the combat to a really good level. And for those of you that were involved in the development of that, you guys did an excellent job. Dragon Age Inquisition could have easily turned into this big open exploration area snooze fest like Skyrim, but actually the combat is very deep and can potentially be very engaging. And so for those of you who are going to give this build a try, I hope it's a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun for me on this recent playthrough of mine. It was very engaging. I found myself, as I was exploring areas throughout Ferelden and Orlais, that with the way that this build functions and the rotation you need to maintain to really bring out its potential, it was very entertaining. It was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed this playthrough of mine, particularly with this build. And once again, as I said earlier in the video, this was really a labor of love, because I'm a huge fan of the Dragon Age universe and its lore, and I was really impressed with the combat in this game in particular. So once again, I hope that this video has been helpful, and it'll either motivate you to give the warrior another try, or maybe if you haven't played the warrior before, you'll try out the Reaver specialization and you'll see how bad it is to basically just rip and tear, rip and tear, rip and tear. Thanks for watching.